Let's start our meeting in the usual way by I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So, are there any changes to the agenda? Maybe we could go ahead.
Yes,
Lisa?
there is. There is a budget transfer adjustment to, reading it now, from multiple lines in the amount of $70,000 to go toward repair and maintenance.
Great, thank you. So we'll add that to the consent agenda. I don't think we need a motion for that too.
Nope, we don't need a motion, but I just would want to say for those who are joining us internally here, in person and also online, that the transfer is for ongoing work that's happening underneath the Pratt, having to do with underground piping or drainage or lack thereof. So some of the work that's going to be done is there's going to be some new piping and drainage routed to a different location inside the existing
So should we ask,
landscape.
should we ask the questions now or when we get to the?
We can do it then. I didn't know if, I didn't want it to be passed and just like not talked about. I wanted to make sure that the community knew what that was for, that transfer was for.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, the consent agenda, we'll make sure we have time to discuss. And I also would like to propose a brief non-public session at the end of the meeting. There's just one item I want to bring up, and I think it will take maybe 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. The student representative will be looking forward to her joining us again after the season's over and she has more time. But now, Ruben, it's on to you, the superintendent's report.
Right, I spoke with our student rep just a little while ago. She is currently practicing with the rest of the team. They won their quarterfinal games fest Saturday here. It was held here against Kearsarge. And we'll be playing against, I believe it's Hopkinton on Thursday. Of course, we'll be watching the weather this week to see what's happening on Thursday and whether we need to call a remote day or some other sort of cancellation. So we're watching that. Right now, it appears that Thursday is the day that is likely to have the most precipitation, whether that's snow, whether that's sleet, you know, everything's all going to be depending upon the temperature, and we'll just wait and see a little bit longer until that firms up. I spent a little bit of last week in San Antonio, representing the state of New Hampshire and also the Jaffrey Rich Walker School District over at the AASA National Conference. There were some good elements to that conference. We got to listen to Stephen Covey, who is a best seller, talking about leadership and the importance of shifting the conversation and approaches to leadership in this new era. Good news is that's the direction we're heading and what you talked about, which was good. Several of the sessions that I went to on MTSS, on college, school relationships and partnerships, on before and after school programming, and which included summertime and then also communication. A lot of the, I got some nice ideas from a couple of individuals who were speakers that we will bring back and have a conversation with, I think, and improve ourselves. But also, I think that it also was nice to see that we're doing a lot of things that others would like to do across the nation or are attempting to do.
It's not the first time we've seen that, but could you just tell us what MTSS is?
Sure, well, this MTSS was MTSS, not with a B. We've been talking about MTSSB. Now, they're the same. kind of. So MTSSB is multi-tiered systems of support. You may have heard, for those who've been on the board for quite some time, RTI, response to instruction or response to intervention, have been iterations of that. So that's something we certainly want to continue and to improve upon, but it's not necessarily something we would implement. We would just want to make it stronger. Part of doing that is making sure that we have the MTSSB, those same systems and decision-making techniques for multi-tiered systems of support for behavior or behavioral wellness. So one's academic, which was what the conference was on, and then the one that we typically talk about is for behavior. And I was there, gonna wear this tonight because of course I'd wear this everywhere, right? Wouldn't you do that? That's the weirdest thing. I did get a nice plaque, which was good, which has this kind of emblem on there for the recognition this year, but I was able to get this. I was going to wear it and I decided, no, it will go back in the little case, but it's a little medallion that I can hold on to, I suppose. And so that was nice. Met some other people. And so it was good. Weather was cold. It was warmer here in New Hampshire than it was in San Antonio during the time that I was there. And then when I left, it warmed up.
Well, you know, it's an odd time when it comes to weather.
It is.
Our forester informed us today that he has never seen a winter like this.
Yeah,
I don't know, there's been a few.
it's been an interesting one for certain. Other items that we have been dealing with lately or will be working on is that tomorrow night we'll have the first meeting of one of our short-term committees that we have. This is going to be on policy work in the area of discrimination, bullying, harassment, kind of talking about a broad array of topics that all are linked together. It will be a little bit different than some of our other meetings because the subject matter can be sensitive, and we got to make sure that we're also sensitive to people's personal stories in those areas for why they are interested in being part of that. Last week when I was not here, John Leclerc was able to run the conversation with the athletic group. So we'll have another meeting with that. We have another meeting with the elementary group as well. So far, their focus has been increasing volunteerism and improving before and after school experiences for kids. Things of that nature, maybe even looking at our time and our resources that we currently have. Nothing major, just looking at what we have differently. After all of these committees run their, what I would call 4 to 5 experience courses, we'll have reports back to the board of some sort, whether it be a PowerPoint, whether it be a couple people presenting. Another group that met, and actually I don't have all the information on it, but David Dustin was there last Wednesday, was a group of people that are working on intergenerational community. So what we had met the previous Friday right in this room with a group of about, I don't know, 12 to 14 high schoolers who are on what is currently called the WOW committee. They come from a variety of walks and grades. They're just interested in improving their school and improving the school community. So they were a natural fit to work with some of these individuals that we've met with in the community. And my understanding is, though I don't have all the details, they've come together to come up with some initial practices or strategies to bring people together, which is neat. So just by including people in work that's already happening. So perhaps later on, you know, more can be said about that, but I'll find out more the next time we meet. And yes.
David, did you have a chance to participate in that?
I did. Pretty much what Ruben said was how the meeting went. There was a lot of discussion about a project that this student group is doing this upcoming weekend, which is going to be kind of a redesign of some of the bathroom spaces in the school with some student created paintings and murals, and they have other improvements just to kind of spruce up that space. So they've invited this group to reach out to some community groups and see if there's folks who want to come in on Monday of the vacation week, which is one of the days they're going to be working, to do sort of coffee and donuts and get to know these individuals and invite them to help if they'd like, but otherwise just to kind of socialize. And the second thing that they talked about doing was bringing back the concept of community dinners, but hosting them here at the school, and maybe looking at the use of our fax room spaces and cafeteria and making use of this facility, as well as having the students involved. So that the older sort of system of rotating nonprofits could actually be housed right here in the building, as another way to sort of link up the groups. So those are the two that they seem the closest to bringing to the front and starting with. Both the community members and the learners involved expressed a huge amount of interest in growing things down the line, but both said, start small, build partnerships, get people kind of comfortable being in the school, and then look at other avenues to grow. So I would say it was very productive, and I was pleased that the group came out with already 2 ways to start kind of moving with concrete projects that they could do together.
And it was nice that our learner voice was at the forefront.
Mm.
There have been a lot of initiatives, a lot of conversations within communities about improvement of culture and town and so forth, and missing from all these conversations has been our student population. So these individuals have the opportunity to, I think, shape some really neat things for the future, to improve community for all. And then we have a couple of positions after the break that we're letting, basically the position we're accepting applications for and so forth, and resumes for the Jaffrey Grade School principal. So we're putting that group together who's going to be on that committee to do the interviews, and we'll let that ad run until the 5th of March, I believe it is. So the end of vacation. And then we also are currently collecting resumes and applications for the replacement of our facilities director. So in the weeks to come, we'll start to have that process as well. And I'm sure there's a lot more going on, but those are the highlights.
Great. Does anybody have any questions for Ruben? Okay, and I'd like to point to one more change to the agenda, which is that we have done the superintendent's report before the live calendar and the
Public comments.
public comments. So let's switch back to that. Get ourselves back on track.
All right, this is Nicholas Handy, Communications Coordinator, School Board Secretary. You can hear me but not see me if you're online. As you can see, there's quite a lot on the calendar, but we're kind of toward the end, the last couple weeks. So we do have a few events. We had a couple things postponed. But we have our music concert at RMS tomorrow for 4th graders. We have a snow date for the next day. We have our winter carnival at JGS happening on Thursday. We have a CTE open house at Conval on Thursday night. An AP art trip on Friday, and then we have the vacation to close out the month. I don't know if we want to go into the next month at all, but I guess we can look at the first part. We have that voting day on the 14th. School board meeting on the 6th. We have a high school dance on the 11th, Saturday. We have some another art trip and a PTSA meeting on the 13th. An open mic night at CHS on Wednesday the 15th. And a performance. It looks like we need a little bit more information as we're getting closer to that date. So I think at that point, that kind of wraps up the things that we have more firm information for. And, when we come back on the 6th, we can talk further about the month of March. Anybody have any questions or anything like that? All right.
If I can just ask a quick general question, I know that the candidates night has been set for Jaffrey. I think it was the 4th of March. Have you guys heard about, just to hear the school board candidates? Um, stuff.
Yes.
Have you heard about a Ringe one? When that is?
I have not heard about Ridge, no.
Yes, please.
Yeah, the Ridge one is on seventh,
On what?
the 7th of the rec center,
At what
Perfect.
time?
6:20.
Perfect.
What time?
6:20, you said, or something like that?
6:20 on the 7th?
Did you say 6:20?
Would be- what is it?
Thank you for letting us,
All right.
appreciate
I'll get
that.
up.
Okay.
So on the 7th, and I think, was it the 4th for the Jaffrey one? Someone, I think I'm remembering that. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's the second,
The 2nd.
Thursday, the second.
Thank you.
I think one nice thing about hearing that date for me is that traditionally, I think it's usually held on a Monday that we have a board meeting, so obviously you know, people would have more ability to attend both the school board meeting and then the candidates night on the next day, so. All right, I'm gonna put the public comment policy up on the screen for everybody. Just make sure that you're familiar with the policy before making a public comment. We do have both an in-person and an online audience, so I'll just explain the rules real quick. In either case, if you're making a public comment, first name, last name, and town of residence before making said comment. If you are in person, you can just raise your hand and I can bring a microphone to you. You won't hear yourself in the microphone, but it'll just go into the live stream. And then if you are remote, you can use the hand raise feature on the bottom of whatever screen you're using. That will allow me to give you the ability to speak, and then you can make your public comment. I guess while we're waiting to see if anything comes in, as always, we do have 2 public comment sessions at every school board meeting, beginning of the meeting, end of the meeting. So if you hear something tonight, you want to make a public comment after that, you're more than welcome to do so at the end of the meeting. And I am not seeing anybody online, and it doesn't seem like our in-house person is raising his hand, so we'll say session number 1 is over with no comments.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So, should we move on to the superintendent's report? Oh, no, we already did.
Well, there's more. I think later on we'll be discussing the CTE, and so just that. Chris from the superintendent over at Messina gave us a copy of their RFP that they've put out for architectural engineering for the additional site that they would like. I know we have more conversations that we need to have around that was discussed at the education committee and should be brought to the board and so forth, but we're going to be working this week on finishing that RFP off so that we can send it out as well to get requests for proposals for that work to keep on moving forward. And that's for this, the CTE. We're up for the whole, like Conval, Messina, us, we're up for a renovation grant basically. So that could pay for 75% from the state for new construction or renovation having to do with career and technical education. That's what CTE stands for. So we can have improve our construction trades or building trades programming. And we could, if we would like to, add other programming.
So it sounds like this is something we really should meet about, because if we're doing RFP, obviously we want to direct it towards the items that we're looking for, yes. Like specifically, for instance, Messina already knows it wants to improve its automotive, that's what it has. And we would want to do the same for what we already have. But I think that they are looking to add diesel engines over there. I believe that's what their desire is. And so if we were to add things, it could be, I wasn't at this last education committee meeting, because I was not here in the state, but it could be culinary, could be
I don't know, there were like 4 others that were there, but.
Would you like me to
Sure,
chime in?
sure, just if you could chime in and let them know, that would be fantastic.
So some of the possibilities that were presented during the education committee were to do culinary arts or cosmetology, or to add on to forensics and public safety, which would tie back into our regular science classes, as well as tie into Conval's public safety courses that they have as well.
But certainly I believe that the excitement around cosmetology and culinary is there. And apparently the need as well, because they wouldn't even be saying that we could add this if there wasn't an actual documented need in the region. You, Nick has his hand.
Yes, Nick.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that for anybody interested in learning more about that, education committee meeting was uploaded today onto our YouTube page. If you look into the description of the video itself, it has the presentation linked to it, so you can observe the presentation on your own. And you can also watch the video where that conversation's had, so.
Okay.
That's SAU 47 broadcast. Search that in YouTube, it'll pull up the page and then find it. Pretty much right on the top.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, those have been great. I've watched a couple of the education committee meetings. It's really been nicely recorded and easy to follow. You can even, at least on my computer, I can even increase the speed a little bit. Yeah, because people talk slowly mostly.
Yeah, we do.
So also there is a timetable,
Yes,
and we need to look at facilities. Relative to buildings and our use of buildings.
I'll end there.
Yes, and we had our facilities committee meeting today. Charlie, you asked some great questions, and it was great of John to answer them beforehand and help us move forward. But there's a lot to think about and to act. Okay, well, great. So thanks for the second report. There are times when we stay here way too late, and yet we realize that there are lots of things we could.
There's an incredible amount happening right now, in positive ways. I have more, but it's we can do it later. Because we're gonna play something.
I know Charlie's anxiously waiting for that the dashboard, so.
I do have some data dashboard I don't know, templates or mock-ups, I guess you could say, that you could take a look at, and we could talk about whether they are what you're looking for.
Great.
I have
Great.
them right here.
Great, excellent. Okay, well, super, and we will be getting to the CTE agreement, and that's another opportunity to, bring forward anything that you think of between now and then. So now we're on to our consent agenda. So can we get a motion on the consent agenda?
We accept the consent agenda.
Thank you, Forbes. Do we have a second?
Second,
Christine, thank you. And discussion.
Yes. The budget transfer for $70,000. I understand what's happening. It's just a budget transfer. It's not a bid, it's not an expense, but my question is, how did we estimate $70,000 for that particular project?
Currently, I believe 29,000 has already been, because they've been working on this for quite some time. So 29,000, we're waiting for the next bill, and we think that's going to be very similar. And then there's a third part, which is let's fix it. Hopefully that's the fix that they have proposed and so forth is likely to come in around maybe 68,000 is what we're thinking, but 70 to be.
And so John did call in on an emergency basis.
It's over $3,000 a day for this company to be here.
And they've given us some estimates and started.
Yeah, I saw the estimate for $20K for the excavation and.
Yep.
Okay,
So it's been done in thirds of about 20 to 25,000 each time.
so my expectation is that at some point in time, it'll cost $70,000 And we'll have the hole filled.
The hole will be filled and there will be new drainage going to a different location. So, and hopefully, I believe part of it will be that the area of concern will be either cut off, blocked off, filled in, whatever, so that it doesn't go down to all the crushed area and just filling up the underground with the water, not draining anywhere. It needs to
Because
be.
right now that there's that trench diminishes the support track, the Pratt.
Yeah, and they're going to have someone look at the foundation before they fill that back in to make sure things are in good order.
Because my concern
It
is,
looks okay, but
my concern is we keep fixing one thing and then something else breaks because we were under there last year for something else.
something very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can't be a yearly thing. We gotta fix it right.
Right.
And it's hard because, when we look back at plans that were done or designs, they're often not available for work that's,
Yeah.
more than a certain number of years old. Now, the building is 50 years old and it's, and even when you do something, you don't know if something you're doing is affecting something else. You try and get the best assessment you can to
Yeah.
avoid that, but. Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's all the questions I have on budget transfer.
okay, sure, thank you. If there being no more questions, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And so that passes 600. Okay. And, now we're ready for item number 7, action items. The 2023-24 program of studies, follow up to the last meeting.
Thank you again for giving me some time tonight. I'm just back to look at that grading section of the program of studies that we pulled out the last time and did not approve with the rest of the document. We have done 2 additional staff meetings focused heavily around this topic, and the staff is in concurrence. We have all of us. That's the word I'm looking for. Consensus, that's the word. The staff has consensus that we would like to go with the language that's here in the program of studies. We've started creating some specific types of support programs for next year that will be the focus of a lot of our staff meeting times for the rest of the year, kind of getting the structures built. But the staff definitely is comfortable and feels like that raising of the expectations to a more reasonable level makes sense.
Okay,
Superintendent of the year.
What you just stated was an example of MTSS.
Yes.
Multi-tiered systems. You were saying that the staff was going to be working on developing. What was the word you used?
Systems of support. I think,
Systems of
something
support
like that.
or extra support areas in order to make certain that when they add the extra expectation that we're able to ensure that that individuals meet.
And right now, the MTSS types of things, the systems of support that they're looking at run the gamut from kind of increasing the flow of data to teams, that team PLCs, so that they can quickly get a snapshot of when a learner has earned a 1 on a learning goal and step in a lot quicker to support them. So that's kind of the early phase of support they're looking at. Mid-range, we're looking at developing some systems, either looking at our testing windows and instead of just having learners leave on days that we have state testing and things like that, building in some longer periods of support for learners. There's one group that's exploring some mid-year conversation. How can we use that transition between the first half and the second half of the year to kind of immediately support learners who have missed learning goals in a course, and then looking at bulking up and bolstering our summer programs to better target those specific learning goals that may have been missed. So it starts out everybody kind of low-key levels of support, and then we're looking at increasing the intensity as the semester and year wears on, and potentially learners fall further through some of those areas. But with that piece in place, the staff was consistently all across the board wanting to raise the expectation to that level. We feel that our learners are capable of achieving at least a level 2, developing in all of the skills that are taught and assessed. We feel like the staff, with again some of these programs being built, will be capable of supporting them. And I don't think anybody is particularly comfortable with having a low bar set for our learners because we know that they're capable of doing more, so. That's it. I don't have anything else to present.
No, that's okay, and this is consistent. But what about some discussion? Yeah.
I think I recall that the grading for the juniors and seniors in high school were going to be letter grades. Are we on, am I still talking on the same page here?
So what we're looking at doing is continuing to phase out the 0 to 100 kind of traditional system of reporting grades. So with next year's junior and senior class, because they'll have at that point 2 or 3 full years with that type of grade, we were not comfortable with those upperclassmen pushing them to this revision to the system. So just for the class of 2024 and the class of 2025, we'd be maintaining 0 to 100 translations. Everybody below them would be fully into a proficiency-based kind of system.
But as the juniors and seniors move out,
Correct.
those that replace them will be on the new system.
Correct.
And we also discussed last week or whenever it was we met, the discrepancy between, or the gap between the state standard performance
Mhm.
and the grades. And I think you said that there was a pretty good size gap between them, right? The standards were, we were a little low, our grades were higher than this.
It's almost, I think I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
kind of that the scores that learners are earning for a grade in a class, like math, for example.
Right.
Typically is a lot higher than whatever their
Right.
proficiency scores. And I think that's the case pretty much universally, that the classroom grades, because there's different types of assessment, they're
Right.
always higher. Part of our goal with reporting in a similar fashion, using specific learning goals and using the same types of language, is to get that alignment closer, so that hopefully we're not having a learner who scores a 1 on their state assessments having an A in the class. The
Right.
idea is to try to bring those closer.
Right. So. Is there do you have a goal in terms of how you, that can be reached in terms of increasing their performance?
Mhm. I think part of the goal is ensuring that since we're saying every learner has to score a 2, which is that kind of developing range on every single learning goal,
Right.
as long as our assessments continue to improve in terms of how they assess to that learning goal, that almost guarantees that that gap shrinks a little bit, because we're not going to have grade inflation or saying, okay, well, you participated well, or
Right.
things like that, that have nothing to do with actual academic performance. We've already kind of stripped those out, and now we'll be reporting them more similarly. We've tried having some specific goals, like in middle school math, for example, saying we want 50% of our learners to be on target with their state assessment, but we need to do a better job getting those systems in place before we set really high goals tied to that particular type of assessment. So we're not there just yet. I think all of us are kind of in a place of needing the system to be clear and align with our philosophy and our practices before we look at the state assessment and say, let's try to set a goal that brings these to some percentage together.
Do we know how we compare in terms of state assessments in certain subject matter to other schools in our group?
You can go on the platform that the state puts out. It's like the school's report card, I guess. I haven't pulled up and created like a data chart that compares us to other schools directly, but I have looked myself. We're not doing particularly well or particularly poorly. We're kind of on par with other places, but our growth has been a little bit better than some other local schools. So this year, for example, based on last year's results, the middle school was taken off of the state accountability list and is now deemed in good standing because the growth factors across all of our areas were what the state would have wanted to see. So I think our growth has been better perhaps, but we're not necessarily blowing anybody out of the water or falling way behind. We're kind of right in the middle of the road with other schools.
Do we have an explanation for why we're kind of in the middle compared to other people?
But I think there's a couple of things. I think one of them is that with this whole COVID world and having kids in remote learning, especially the year that we had kind of that hybrid approach, we did better than a lot of schools because we didn't have our learners out 5 days a week for that whole 2020 to 21 school year. But we did have a cohort of kids who chose to be remote for that entire year to the tune of 20 to 25 learners from every single grade level. And that has a huge impact. I mean, you've got a good chunk of your learners who are accessing learning in a way that for some of them wasn't ideal. So I think there's an impact from that piece. I think as we've made some transitions and continue to focus on our learning goals, getting to that power standard level, looking at assessments, we've done a lot of investment and started at a pretty low level that we've been working out of for quite some time. Our middle school spent a long time on that state accountability list. So, coming out from that kind of place and developing learners back to a level where they can then grow as they get into high school, that takes a lot of work. I think some of the impacts of different changes in administration, different changes in staffing over the years, it just takes time for those things to become integrated into the school culture. So there's just been a lot of things, I guess, going on here, but I think we're on a really good footing moving forward.
Thank you.
And I think our staff's desire to raise the bar for learning with our learners and get them to a place where we're saying we'll ensure every single learner reaches at least a developing level. I think that's going to have a very large impact.
May I ask a clarifying question about something Forbes asked at the beginning? So we have the 11th and 12th graders next year continuing with the conversion to the 0 to 100 scale. Are they part of the developing change? So what that would be like a 73,
72. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that would be nothing lower than that.
Correct.
Without having that support being put into those individuals as well.
Okay. We believe very strongly that threshold should be in place for everybody. And the only question that the staff had was how to make sure that we have the systems to ensure that learners reach that level, not just hope that they do. And I will say that that's a conversation that shows that, I guess, the professionalism and the growth of our staff, that conversation immediately went to a place of, we want to ensure this type of learning. So before we say yes, let's have a conversation about how we do that. I think that was a very high level conversation that I was impressed to hear coming from the staff, because that demonstrated that they really do believe deeply that every learner can reach that level of achievement. And a lot of times you'll hear schools that put in their mission things like, we strive for or aspire for kids to do X, Y, or Z, but our staff said we want to ensure that they reach this level of learning. I think that's a big deal.
I'll just say it's a major deal. Expectations are an extraordinarily important reason why people succeed or don't succeed. And having universal expectations is the key to, again, an MTSS program, that core instruction.
Do you think the increased expectations will include more homework?
I don't know if I go as far as to reference how a teacher will or won't use homework. I think it varies. I mean, I'm teaching, like I said last time, the AP class right now. Yeah. I certainly have expectations for them to do things outside of class. And I'm very clear with reading and taking notes, and some things that really aren't appropriate uses of class time. I'm not going to grade them on their notes ever. I don't think that's effective. So in that sense, I'm not using homework the way I probably did 7 years ago, but I'm still maintaining the expectation that they do that and trying to demonstrate in class how that outside time gets used to sort of support their learning in class. I know some teachers do give projects or things like that and ask them to finish them at home. Others take an approach of saying, I want you to be here when you're doing your work so I can monitor and support your learning. I think it depends on the teacher, not necessarily the system in terms of how they use that.
I was just thinking that depending on the homework assignments, you might be able to increase parental participation in the child's education.
I think that depends heavily on the family environment and the ability that the family has to support their learners' needs. And that ranges from families that work, families that don't have access to some of the technology. One thing that our staff reflected on as we kind of came out of remote learning was seeing the dramatic, split between families where maybe both parents are working long hours, or their access to technology is constrained, or they have lots of siblings in the home, and seeing those individuals trying to process any work at home versus the individuals who have their own bedroom, their own computer, families that are able to be there and supportive. It's a really stark difference. And if we place expectations heavily on home learning, there's a whole group of learners who get disenfranchised because of that. And it creates issues for their learning. So COVID created a lot of conversation around that topic, which again is why I think we've moved away from saying homework should be where we emphasize rigor or expectation.
So can you talk a little bit more about what happens to the student who doesn't get a 2?
Mhm.
Right? Are you going, I know you said each teacher is going to sort of address that sort of on a case by case and class by class basis, but in terms of their schedule, I don't know, can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So the first step of, even right now, if a learner is failing a learning goal or doesn't complete something, the expectation for a teacher is that they're having conversations with that learner and their families. That's always the first step. Reaching out, I'm concerned, we had this assessment, this is the learning goal, your child didn't do the work or didn't do well, so I want to support them. So that's kind of the first piece. Offering support, bringing the parents into the conversation and kind of having a dialogue. If that doesn't demonstrate effectiveness, we often ask our teachers to work with the school counselor, maybe set up a meeting with the learner and the parent, or with the learner and the teacher and the parent, and figure out maybe what's missing. So that's, I guess, the next kind of step.
Mhm.
If we get to a place where it's nearing the end of a quarter and there's still this work missing, that's when the teams are looking at adding things, maybe a day between the quarters or a testing day where we can have that half day afternoon time frame. And we reach out and say, your learner is missing some learning goals. We'd like them to spend some time with these teachers, kind of getting them caught up and fixed. And then at the end of the course, if there's still an issue with missing, not being at a level 2, that's when we would look at maybe that mid-semester catch-up kind of program, or having the summer program available, or things like that. The other thing that the teachers are exploring is recombining back that kind of intervention period during the day that we've tried to have in the past, but really heavily focusing it around those learning goals that learners haven't reached a level 2, and building that in during the school day as another option to pull learners in if they need some extra time or support.
Okay, so that's like the kids called office hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're looking at bringing it back with a lot more focus.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good question.
And right now, these are all concepts that the staff are just beginning to meet in committees and work out the structures for, because one thing we started off with 6 or 7 ideas, and the goal is to bring them to 3 or 4 actionable things. What we don't want to do is introduce something like office hours and just say, okay, we're doing this, without having structures, shared kind of philosophy of what it will look like, and an ability to then share that with the learners and families in a way that makes sense. I think that kind of has doomed other iterations of that support during the day, and we want to make sure we avoid that for whatever systems we're doing next year.
David, one of the things that I think I understood you to say, or maybe the team to say, last time, was that you didn't want the grading system to be such that the student would feel, well, they've met the minimum requirement
Right,
for achieving that credit, so they didn't have to do more.
right.
And it sounds like that's something would always be a problem. I remember hearing that in terms of standardized testing, that sometimes students would see no incentive to really try hard on a standardized test. How can you talk just a little bit more about how you address that?
Sure. Part of why we settled on setting a proficiency score for each covered learning goal is it requires that anything that's covered in the class, instructed to, practice provided, and then assessed, the learner has to at least demonstrate that initial level of comprehension and skill to be able to claim success. So and the goal of moving away from averaging, or move away from saying, okay, you need a total combined whatever, which allows for some of that hiding of learning goals or doing the bare minimum. If we look at everything that's covered and assessed and say you have to at least have a level 2, the expectation there would be that there's no major power standard that gets left on the table, because a learner can't pass the class if they skip or ignore one whole chunk of what's going on. So the example I gave last time was a learner in a computer science class saying, well, I've already got, an average of a 2.3 or whatever, so I'm not going to do my digital safety unit, which was the last learning goal covered. And that in our current system, that learner would have been okay, never having attempted or demonstrated proficiency in a core concept of the class, which is computer safety and digital safety. That was the most stark example. If we had been in this system, there would have been no way the learner would have to at least have done the initial learning and demonstrated that developing level of skill or knowledge. Otherwise, they would have to do that separately to pass the class.
And that's the concept of competency.
Right. And that also gives you a lot clearer focus if a learner does fall and needs some support. Currently, where our threshold for credit recovery is a 50, what that 50 means, even using learning goals and then converting them is very vague. And with summer programs or in the middle school with our sort of academic support in the summertime, it's really hard to know exactly where a learner might need that support in a class. If you're looking just at the areas where a learner scored at level 1, that provides a really clear avenue for pulling resources, providing opportunities for learning to fix that, and bolstering that specific skill versus just kind of throwing everything at a learner in summer school and hoping that somehow they get above that magic 60% threshold.
Will college admissions people understand this new system?
Yeah, we did a whole college admissions panel forum with community members and parents, and their consistent message to every school, every parent, every learner is that they don't care what the system looks like. They'll unwind it anyway and turn it into whatever makes sense for them. As long as we send along our program of studies, which we always do, and as long as it demonstrates high levels of achievement, which a 1 to 4 system still is pretty clear, you know, the difference between a 2 and a 4 is still pretty obvious. That's really what they care about. They told our group of parents that they have some schools that don't do grades at all. They just have basically like narratives for each class that generally outline what's been done and what hasn't been done, and they'll accept those and convert them into something usable as well. So they basically said, don't worry, as long as you're taking rigorous coursework and achieving at high levels, and we'll send the system along, they'll convert it to whatever makes sense for them. That's also part of why we're proposing sticking with the 4-point kind of GPA scale as well, to provide some comfort there that it's a recognizable system.
If there was a remote tutoring program that the state is offering, has that gained any traction?
Limited. When I've had parents reaching out to me asking for tutoring, there's been actually an uptick in parents who have reached out after each report card and saying, well, I spent about 30 minutes with my learner going through it. And once I really got a sense of what they needed, now they need tutoring and whatever. But when I've offered or suggested tutor.com to them, a lot of what I've gotten is, well, yeah, that's fine. Maybe they'll use that at school, but we really want a person kind of sitting with them for tutoring, which I understand.
Yeah.
For learners who are maybe in higher order classes or more independent, I think tutor.com works, and I get usage statistics. That's what I tend to see a lot of. But I think when a learner is at that place of feeling behind or is not doing well, they really want somebody sitting with them and walking them through whatever it is. So I'd say very limited traction.
Just piggybacking off of your question and your comment, you've had parents reaching out, and I think you gave the example of them having a conversation, maybe 20 or 30 minutes with their child and so forth. Are you seeing an uptick, because this is kind of a goal of this model, an uptick of conversation around learning, and specifically like with parents and their kids, due to the level of description that they are provided, as opposed to just the simple, you got an A, you got a B, you got a C, or you're failing, or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it's notable to me because I don't get a lot of phone calls about grades on the level of, I noticed this and I want to get support for my learner. A lot of what I end up getting is, I'm frustrated about something with the teacher. Can you help me set up a meeting? But I've gotten less of those this year. And because I've gotten some, and I usually don't get any, a notable uptick in people saying, when I sat down and looked, I was reading through really great comments on this class, and they seem to be doing really well. All the goals had, 3s, and parents don't usually translate that to say proficient. They just say 3s or whatever. But over here, I noticed that they had a lot of 1s. And so we're going to look for some tutoring. Can you help us? I've gotten, I don't know, 2 or 3 of those phone calls just in the last 2 quarters, which is a lot because I usually don't get any of those. So I know that there's at least conversation being sparked. That's maybe a little bit more robust. And being in the classroom now and seeing learners looking at their proficiency scores, I don't get anybody coming and asking me ever anymore, how can I get an A? I do get a lot of learners saying, I got a 2, can I get some help and try that again? Which is what the goal is. We want them to be looking at that specific learning goal and asking how they can do better on that skill or knowledge. So those are anecdotal. I have no data that supports that except my own observation. But anecdotally, there's at least an uptick in people processing a little bit more. And we're happy to meet with anybody who has questions about that. Again, I've had those phone calls that I fielded that have mostly been positive, so.
I just wanted to mention, one thing you said really struck me, because I don't know if I heard this previously, but I didn't remember or what, but you said that 20 to 25 learners from each grade level was what you saw. And I guess that was the 2021 school year?
Correct, yeah.
It's interesting. Would that have been both learners who basically sort of dropped out for the year, as well as learners who worked hard remotely? I mean, was there
That's just the population of learners who were, because we offered both remote and in person that year. So it was, probably 18 to 25 is a more accurate assessment, but it was a decent chunk of each grade level that opted for remote that year for a variety of reasons. Of those, a chunk of those did drop off and had to be really followed up with, and definitely lost out on some learning as a result of that. And that same year, we also had a decent chunk of time that we ended up being remote in the winter time. And again, we lost a good chunk of learners through that process as well. So by combination of both of those things, it was a heavy impact for sure. But when you consider 7 grade levels and each of them with 18, let's just say an average of 20 to be easy, 20 kids, that's 140 learners who were not in physical contact that entire school year, in addition to not having been in physical contact the spring of the previous year. So that's a hefty chunk of every single class that needs, in most cases, a lot of additional support when they came back. And it's part of why last year on the social emotional peer conflict behavior side was very, very rocky in comparison to this year, where things have hit a much more, expected kind of level.
Well, thank you, David. There are no more questions.
I just have one thing on the Monday, and that is, will the 23-24 student handbook and staff handbook have more information about Otis in it?
Yes, well,
We reference Otis in the program of studies, but if you
Yep.
go to the
we will make sure that there's a really robust section in there for this upcoming school year. Maybe what we'll do is even add an appendix that has just a lot of Otis information, how to set up your account, those sorts of things. It's a great suggestion.
Did you, I didn't hear everything. Did you say staff and parent?
Yeah, staff
Okay.
and parent and students handbook.
Handbooks, yep.
Because the 22, 23 doesn't have hardly anything, and the program of studies for 23, 24 references Otis
Yeah.
at least a couple times. So.
It's definitely a much heavier focus school year, right? I think that's a great suggestion, Charlie. I think we'll just add an Otis appendix that has how to set up your learner's account, who to reach out to, what to look for, sample report cards. But that's a great idea.
I didn't have a question until you just asked your question, if it's okay to ask. Relative to that very topic and with the grading conversation. And with something you said earlier about the learner coming to you and saying, I'm at a 2 right now, could I get some extra help so that I can reassess or show you in a different way or my understanding? Are our learners actively using information that they're getting out of Otis? Like, 'cause I know that there's graphs that occur within their classes and so forth. You know, if that tool is being utilized as.
I don't have as much information about that in terms of learner usage of the analytics features. I just know that they check, just like they did with Web to School, they check their grades, they check their assessments, they check the learning goals section. And they're certainly comfortable using tools like that. And the AP Classroom, which is very similar to Otis, but it's the College Board kind of equivalent. Kids are checking that. I see them in class. They're looking and seeing their little bar graphs in there, and sometimes they'll point to it and say, "Can we do this again?" Sure. So I know that they're certainly capable. I just haven't seen evidence that they're using the evidence in Otis yet, outside of just looking at that grade book assessments, lessons, things like that. Could be a feature in our Otis appendix for supporting learners next year.
Okay, so I guess we need a motion on the grading section of program of studies.
I'll make a motion, we accept the grading portion of the program of studies that we did not include in the last meeting when we approved the program of studies, and the grading was contingent, so.
Okay, thank you, Charlie.
I second the motion.
Daisy, thank you for the second. If there's no further discussion, then I would ask all those in favor to signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, that's a 6-0.
Thank you.
Very good. And then we're on to next steps for the JRMS CHS culture and identity.
So that was me again, and I'm not, again, asking for maybe anything tonight. I just want to, I'll probably come back and bug the board as many times as you'll let me, just so I know if there's anything else that you want the school to sort of do around this topic. Any other things you want us to collect, another presentation, whatever. I just want to keep the conversation kind of going, and, you know, if the board has any direction to the school administrators in terms of how you want us to go forward. Obviously, we'd be welcoming to that, so we don't lose sight of the conversation with all the other stuff going on.
Great. Chris?
I think the grade schoolers want to be asked. So I know that's not your zone, but they have definite opinions on this subject.
Yep.
And probably, you know, all over the place, but they would like to be asked.
All right.
So you said you're gonna keep.
Muskox, is that what they want? They want.
When do
Well,
you
no,
have a
it's Riley
decision?
needing the orange JGS shirt so that it's the same as. the
So-
community.
Yeah.
The rollout of Alma is kind of contingent on what we decide to do for next school year as a district. So whatever the final deadline for Alma is in terms of being able to support one school profile and one set of data versus not doing that, that would be the deadline. I believe it's probably July 1 is their kind of drop dead date, but obviously the sooner that we know, the better, because we can start planning some of those rollout steps.
How much planning time do you how much planning time do you need to be ready for July 1st?
Weeks, couple weeks. And I'll verify with Alma what their absolute deadline would be, but I mean, we're not in the proposed timeline of making any adjustment. We didn't propose any huge changes for next year, except starting to use, if there is a change in identity, starting to use that. But we don't have, it's not like we have a back order of 50,000 uniforms that are waiting on this or anything like that. It'll be a process, but.
It is interesting to ask parents or learners about this because I'll sit with one parent and they'll say, they have a firm opinion that it should be two separate schools, and they have excellent reasons why. And then I'll ask someone else and they'll say, firmly believe it should be one school, and they have excellent reasons why. And I'm like, how are we ever going to decide this? I feel like it's pretty evenly split. I haven't heard anyone say, I don't care. I thought that was interesting.
I think it would be fair to, because it's not just Alma that needs the information. When you're making a course of studies,
Right.
that should reflect it. How about if we simply say our first meeting back in April 3rd, that becomes the time that we make a call on this.
I continue to think that it's an interesting question about changing the names and changing the mascots and the colors and all that. And I think Charlie had a comment last week about you really got to find out what the public thinks and the parents and the voters and stuff like that. But I think it's only part of culture and identity. The culture and identity to me is much broader than this. And I don't know whether you've had those discussions over the years since I've been off the board or not. They're much bigger issues than just those other things. Although those are interesting.
I would say that these are the things that the school staff, administrators and learners can't control on our own. And I'd say the parts of culture that you're talking about, that we do make the decision on a day-to-day basis because it's already within policy and things that the school is supposed to be administering, we do those things anyways, like focusing on shared vocabulary for learning and discussing how to raise expectations and what the opportunities for sixth grade should look like in comparison to 12th grade, and doing traditions that are important to grade spans and building pride in academics. Those are the things that we just do anyways, without coming to the board and asking for permission to do that. I think why this conversation is here with this group is this goes beyond the scope of comfort or authority for the school administrators to kind of make decisions on our own. But it is something that we're saying we believe is important to continuing the evolution of our culture and making sure that the middle level in particular doesn't feel left out. Because I think when you don't have pride in the identity of where you are in the physical plant and feeling like you belong in that place, I think that does have an impact on your learning in the same way that if you show up at a job site that isn't the one you're familiar with and has no kind of connection to you, your desire to do good work diminishes in comparison to when you're at your own home office or home base. I think, like I said last time, our middle school learners in particular, right now, they're kind of left out of the equation. And I don't think that's fair to them to continue doing that. So I don't disagree with you, but I just want to assure you that those other aspects of culture are things we're already doing. This is just a separate conversation because it's this group that has to ultimately decide.
Well, you mentioned the word belonging, and there is good literature and research out there on the importance of people belonging. And identity matters to that sense of belonging, and a certain sense of belonging has to do with them impacts achievement and so forth. And that's for adults as well as kids as well. It's not just the learners we're talking about here, you're talking about the adults. And so when we're talking about culture, goal, we've been talking about this for years, is to build a culture of collaboration, because without a culture of collaboration, you can't have a culture of innovation, improvement, and have that be sustainable. And so what's the environment, what's the model that is going to best promote collegiality, collaboration, shared decision-making, and innovation for the future? Siloing is never the answer.
One thing I think is also part of this is some people are perhaps misunderstanding or just are not clear about what an identity shift for one of the schools or both of the schools means. And when I had a comment, I think I mentioned this last time. Well, we used to be part of NELMS, which is the New England League of Middle School, and now we won't be anymore, and we're not, and we're a bad middle school. That's not even true. I mean, the middle school is part of NELMS. It's still, it's accredited by NEASC now alongside the high school. It's actually grown through this kind of partnership. And nobody's advocating obliterating a middle school model or placing sixth graders in 12th grade classes or getting rid of the grade level teams and looping. These are decisions we've purposely made for many years. It's saying that everybody should be an Oriole, which again is my recommendation, does not change the fact that we would still have grade level teams, a focused middle school model that enshrines social emotional learning alongside academic learning. Those things don't go anywhere, regardless of the decision that the board makes. And I think some people in the community were, and the feedback in the survey, were saying a middle school should be a middle school. I could not agree more. It doesn't mean it shouldn't have an identity, and it doesn't mean its identity shouldn't match with the school it shares a campus with and lots of resources with. So anywho.
Or does this answer your question?
No.
What are we missing?
I understand that a middle schooler or an elementary schooler has to be proud in their school and have an identity and all that. I'm thinking more in terms of somebody goes through the system. 10 years after they've graduated, they've got a job. 20 years after they've graduated, 30 years after they've graduated, you ask those people, tell us about this, the schools that you went through, the system that you went through. What few words would you use to describe your education? And I'm hoping that they wouldn't say something like we had a great basketball team, because this is an educational institution. All the other things are important as well, But primarily, this is an educational institution, and that's what, to me, like when people try to come into this area to think about whether they want to live here, they're going to look up, or many people will, look up to find out how their school is doing academically in terms of the scores and all that. All right. And that's where I'm focused in terms of identity. The long-term identity of the school, of the system that you went through. That's where I'm focusing.
So, if I could just ask, I'm hearing David say that that is a focus of the administration, and they take that as their job. You know, you didn't say your number one job, but I can tell from other things that are in the program of study and that you're working on that is, you know, like a primary goal, but it's something we've already given them, in a sense, that directive.
We already have the tools and the direction and the policies, and we already have the things we need to keep working on that. I guess what we're missing right now is an answer to, or an ability to address this last question of what direction to take this 6 through 12 building that we have here. And I don't disagree with you. I guess evidence that I look forward to that, we just had one of our learners who was interviewed by WMUR. She's a basketball player. She gave a very nice interview about her process and about the school. And the words she used were opportunity that her school affords. She feels like she was able to express creativity. There was a lot of things that had nothing to do with basketball, but spoke very highly of her school experience. I know that we're doing the things already that can continue to build that type of pride and culture. I can't do anything about middle schoolers making a hand-drawn marker poster to stick up in the press. There's at least something red and blue for them. That I don't have a tool for that right now. So I guess that's what I'm getting at. I don't disagree with what you're saying. That is the central purpose of a school, but so is making sure that the kids who go here feel like they belong as part of the building and culture of the school. And I just don't have right now a tool to address that.
I don't disagree with that, any of what you just said.
And they go hand in hand.
I agree.
It was just, I just pulled that up as you were saying, Emma Tenters was interviewed from WMUR.
I don't remember the exact
And
phrase.
her, I pulled up the script
There you
transcript.
go.
There's a couple different cool parts actually to this transcript. It talks about her being a 4.0 GPA student, so it talks about, you know, not an A student, a 4.0, so it's interesting that that was used. 1,000 career points this year. We had a couple of those individuals. That's unique to the school. So this is basketball. But she, you know, was able to be an important aspect of starting the volleyball team and getting that to the point of, she was at the beginning and then obviously becoming a varsity sport, which has been great for getting a lot of individuals involved. She says, along with, you know, being on National Honor Society and I think perhaps a couple of other items. She says really cool. Are you going to show that?
I wasn't necessarily planning on showing it, but at least bringing it up, and it's just the video keeps wanting to play on me. I was just trying to get it on the screen.
Valued at nearly $400.
I mean,
Are we allowed to show that? Just out of curiosity, is it copyrighted?
that I'm not aware of. Like I said, I was just trying to get it up on the screen, and every time I go to scroll down to show the transcript that you were referring to, it
Oh, okay.
starts
So,
playing the video, and then when I try to pause it, another ad pops up, and then I try to pause it
Right.
again. It's-
Very
it's-
tricky.
that's fine.
it's a
So
fight that I'm having with the video.
she
I'll try
talks,
to get
she
some.
talks about being a member of the community and trying to make the community better because we've got great people and so forth. So it was a really good conversation. She was one of the individuals who's on the intergenerational team as well, working on building community, which is really neat. And then states toward the end, our school has plenty of opportunities, really good with letting us create things. I think that's not something you always hear. When you're a learner, you're like, the school gives us opportunities to create. So I kind of try to do everything I can, get all and reach all the goals that I've, you know, stops the language stops here, but it was a nice, well-rounded interview that started with, of course, basketball. Yeah, it was toward the end. So that's an example.
Yeah.
And in the background, interestingly enough, you have of that picture, if you were to actually see the video, she'd be right in front of the bird's nest with the Oriole grasping the basketball. course, that Oriole was put there partly not just for the sake of having the bird's nest, but also so that we were treating our walls better. And that has worked. There were some years that we like to play baseball in that gym. And break the concrete.
And the very expensive curtain.
So it's my understanding that the school board chair and the superintendent who make up the agendas for March 3rd will put a decision on that agenda.
April.
Excuse me, April 3rd.
Okay.
Sorry.
And it sounds like the board would like to see some data from the elementary schools in particular, so I can talk with Nikki Fraley and Susan Sarles and see if we can get some means of collecting information. That is definitely a group we didn't include originally. We got parents, community members, teachers, learners here, but nothing from elementary, so we could definitely collect that. Share it with the board.
Not that I don't appreciate you being here, David, but I don't think you should have to come back up week after week after week.
I won't really do that. I told my staff, I'll keep going, but. So April
Well,
3rd, that
you
sounds
know,
good.
I don't know, I'd like you to come here more frequently, it's great.
Yeah.
Yes, some
But not the
interesting
same
conversations. Not every week, maybe, but,
I'm always very tired the next day. This is usually nearly my bedtime, so.
yeah, well, understand that. Understand that. It was great to have discussion and about, how we compare to other schools and how you're tracking that. Well, we know it's very complex and it's even a funny question, and in a sense, you want to compare yourself to whatever competency, it's not to what your neighbors are.
Right.
But what else can you do?
It's the only data point that you can easily pull. We are planning at the education committee down the road to do our second trimester data sort of dig in terms of learner discipline. We did a first trimester. We're looking at doing another round of that. And we should at that point, assuming that the New Hampshire SAS system has worked out whatever issues are going on. We have 7th and 8th grade data. We should have 6th grade data. So we're hoping to do a comparison and show some growth to the education committee. So I think that'll probably be April. For anybody who's interested.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again for the time. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Likewise.
Before you move on to the next two items,
Yes,
I would just like to report that the facilities committee has reviewed both and supports both of the action items proposed by Carrie.
I'm sorry, they reviewed and support
The
what?
facilities committee has reviewed both the purchasing guidelines changes and the CTE agreement. Okay, put forward by Carrie, and we support both of those proposals.
And the finance committee as well, right? Yeah,
What did I say? I thought I said the finance.
facilities.
Oh, jeez.
It's all right.
All right, it's the finance committee.
Yeah.
Holy mackerel, I'm
No, you're doing fine. You're
I'm
doing fine.
losing it, let me tell you.
No, you're not.
My tongue is doing one thing and my brain's another.
Well, the CTE has to do with facilities, right? So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Right. Okay. So, purchasing guidelines.
Yeah, annually, we look at the purchasing guidelines and the board accepts or changes.
We're making changes to include the processes which support meeting federal requirements. In the current issue, in the current guidelines, we have a section on federal grants and stuff, and it tells us what we are supposed to do, but not how. And when we add the changes suggested by Carrie, it addresses the how as well.
Right. And this is to make sure we stay in compliance with our
With the federal
order
government.
requirements.
We are gonna get basically audited. And soon to see how we are spending our federal funds, and there are things that we need to have in place. And this revision to the policy is one of those things that we need to have in place.
It clarifies.
Yes,
what we've been-
in terms of how we're spending our ESSER funds and any other federal funds that we receive.
Okay,
I move we accept the purchasing guidelines as presented.
Great, thank you, Forbes,
I'll second the motion.
and thank you, Daisy.
On
And
page 4,
yes,
could we get rid of Sears as a local vendor? That feels very outdated at this point.
I'm gonna be. From an unintended consequences perspective, I don't know what that means in this document, Series of an example,
He's gonna get
and
it.
I would hesitate to make the change without Kerry's input.
Yeah, it's just, it's giving examples of local vendors that do not accept things. Sears is no longer a local vendor or anywhere near us. So it says Tractor Supply and Sears,
I think
say keep
that's-
Tractor Supply, but get rid of, yeah, right there. Like, been a while since we've had Sears.
So if you would like to make a motion to have Kerry take a look at that.
Is that what's needed to
I don't
edit
know.
this? I wouldn't have thought that.
We're gonna,
Sky-
we're gonna vote on the changes anyways.
Right. So why,
You know, is, I mean, that's an edit.
Hmm?
I don't think, I think you could approve this. Yes,
Carrie is online. Excuse me, Carrie is online right now,
okay,
and has raised her hand.
great. Carrie, have you heard our question about removing Sears?
Yes, I have, and that's not a problem in this document. We can just put IE Tractor Supply and cross out and Sears, so there's no issue with that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, although it does make me sad. I always liked Sears, but I guess it's time.
Time to
it's,
move on.
it's just one more step of letting it go.
Yes, exactly.
So do I need to amend my motion or are we just gonna vote on the motion and do a little edit?
I think.
Later.
I think you could just amend your motion to say as edited.
As edited, all right.
That work. And that's okay
Yep.
with you, Daisy, okay. All right, so then, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, very good, thank you. And the CTE agreement,
So this has been something that we've had floating around in draft form for quite some time. It's now at the point where I believe Conval has now accepted the changes and the Scenic is seeing, their board seeing this now. And we're seeing it, we don't have to make an acceptance right now. We can, if people want more time, we can bring it back in kind of as a second reading, if you'd like, or we can accept it. Basically, the concept here is that it names us as a CTE center.
and the receiving center.
And a receiving center, yes, which we have been. It wasn't as clear in the previous edition. And it was at one point, the reason why we went through a revision here is that at one point, Scenic and Jaffrey were not going to be considered for funds for CTE renovations.
Right,
It was
Right.
going to be Conval only.
and we,
So there are some questions
Mhm.
regarding the signature page. For Jeffrey Range.
Mhm.
As a chairperson, Jeffrey Range School Board Sending District. That should be sending/receiving, I believe,
it should be what?
sending/receiving, because we're both a sender and a receiver now.
because the document defines us as both a sending and a receiving district, but
Yeah.
it does have different
Interesting for that and Missy
amounts of
too.
compensation.
Yeah.
And I do want to ask about that, and why having the 75% for the sending district, I mean. Is it 75% for the, I didn't understand I just gave it a quick read, but why it was 75% for one group and 25 for the other, since all three are both sending and receiving.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go we're gonna have to go back and look at that again. And make sure that's clarified, because if we're not getting 75%, I'm not sure you'd want to go forward with renovations.
And yet it's a little bit unclear, so knowing the State Department of Education and how carefully they parse their words, maybe we should take a.
Let's take another look at it, yep.
I have a question that I kind of ties into everything. So we in a previous conversation 10 minutes ago, we're talking about the high school name changes. I'm assuming then we would have to go back through and edit every single one of the CTE things, because it would have Conant High School and we would no longer be Conant High School. How does all of that play into the CTE update that we're up for?
Good, fair question, fair question. Thank you. I suspect our lawyer would have a good answer for that, but the question we should definitely.
Well, I think that Conant High School, well, assuming Conant. For saying high school will still be here.
Okay.
But if there is a change, then we have to look at edits on a lot of things.
Yep. This one just made me think of, we're now up for the CTE revision, or however you want to put it, that we also have to pay close attention when we're doing all of that to how are we naming the school if we're changing the names, to make sure that it's all the same.
And there are so many contracts we're in with that same question. All right, so
So for instance, on page 2 of 16, it says this agreement identifies the following receiving districts, all of us. This agreement identifies the following sending districts, all of us. So really, there needs to be more. We need to have more signature pages. It's not a horrible thing that we have us as a receiving district, but we also need to be as a sending district. So, and then everyone needs that too.
Yeah.
Or, like you said, receiving / sending.
right. And I made reference to 75-25, but they were talking about the number of spaces, not the number of dollars. They're saying that the sending school will have 25% of the spaces available, whereas the receiving school would have 75% of the spaces.
Yeah.
Receiving districts, that was,
Yeah.
that's a different thing.
Well, but it's important again.
Yeah.
Because that means that we would have 25% of the spaces at our own building. If we were considered the only receiving districts. So it is important to get the language correct. That of course is not true.
The way I read that is you're all three schools are sending and all three schools are receiving. Then basically what it says is the school can reserve 75% of the seats in whatever it is, that there's like automotive. New Ipswich could have 75 and the other one's 25.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is in practice. But I think to the point was the signature pages
Yeah,
only have Messinic as a sending district
right. That
and
needs to be
and
amended.
us as a sending district. So
Yeah.
just to make sure it's all clarified that we're both
Right.
is key. Yep.
That's why I said sending/receiving.
Okay, so it sounds like this is something we can, we'll take a look at and
Yeah.
put on our agenda.
Well,
for
that's, I mean, we just had a first reading, so that's good.
Right. Okay, so policy discussion. KFR. Use of school buildings and facilities procedure. So I asked to that this be put back on the agenda because it was brought to my attention by the town manager that he feels there's still some confusion regarding the question of who pays and under what circumstances. And that combined with the conversation with Nick Hill over the use of the Little League field, it seemed like we should, make sure that we have our website set up so such that, people looking at it are, that they're not confused over whether they're going to be obliged to pay, and that they know how to request a waiver, and that it's easy to do and fairly transparent. So there's several issues there, I think. With the town, what the town manager said was, our understanding has been that school will use our facilities such as Humison Field. And, we don't charge for that, and we would expect, the same, we have expected the same treatment when we're using the school's facilities. So. Is that still true? And if
Yeah,
not,
that's the practice. I think where the clarification and maybe conversation is at. Is that. And I would say, thank you for bringing this to the board, the policy. I'd like the policy committee to look at this. And clarify the Jaffrey and Ringe nonprofit and youth organizations. So we have, or town recreation, sorry, priority 3 town of Jaffrey and town of Ringe recreation activity department. I think it's important that if it's a Jaffrey town of Ringe or, I'm sorry, the town of Jaffrey or town of Ringe recreation program, that's one thing. It's another thing for private vendors to go through the recreation departments so that they can get their free usage of our facilities and then gain all the costs. We have quite a bit of wear and tear on these facilities. And if people are using this as their business, but going through a town organization to get the nonprofit costs, I think that's something we should consider having a conversation about. And so some of the conversations that we've had recently have been about private individuals, not non-for-profit businesses or individuals, who would get their own insurance and so forth. Making some sort of agreement with the rec departments, whatever that might be, but then utilizing our space. And the rec department gets some sort of kickback or cost, some sort of money out of that. And then that for-profit type of organization is not paying for the actual usage of the facility.
so what would be an example of one of those reasons?
Well, we have a karate program that is done within our schools that goes through the rec department, so they don't pay for the use of the facilities. But that person's getting paid, and that's a
For-profit.
that's a for-profit private business. Could be that we would run other, programs, like say, we had, let's use tennis. This is not a true thing, but it's an example. So we have some sort of person who's a private tennis pro is what they would call it, some sort of instructor says, hey, I have a business, I want to use the Jaffrey tennis courts, which are of course the school's property. So do I go through the school and pay them? Because there's a place for that. Or do I say, I wonder if I can actually make a deal with a recreation department and not pay the fee for the use of the facilities. That's what I think we ought to look at. Because, you know, the school could actually be partnering with these for-profit entities, as the policy would say, and then getting some of the fees, you know, the wear and tear on our facilities, at least partially paid for. So I think it's important to know that that's a possible situation. And it may have been happening for a while.
And it may, yeah,
When outside people come and use
Mhm.
our facilities here and somebody were to get hurt,
Mhm.
does our insurance pay for that?
Well, we have insurance for things of that nature, but if someone is utilizing our facility, they're supposed to be providing us with proof of insurance.
Do they
So
do-
like a company, you know, or the rec department or whatever would have proof of insurance. So it'd be on their
So-
insurance.
I have an example for that. So the JGS Parents Group did a fun run in November. We had, because we weren't doing it at Jaffrey Grade School, we did it at the track. We had to get our own insurance policy to cover that event. So even though the district has insurance for the track, we as a group had to get our own policy for that event.
It's a great question.
so, and that, I think that's fairly typical. If you, anybody who signs up has to provide an insurance certificate.
And that's in the policy?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm confident it is.
It's right there.
Insurance coverage.
But I think the trickier issue is when you have a for-profit group or a not-for-profit group that's, you know, looking to cover part of their costs. And, you know, do we want to provide them free access or free usage because we think it's something of value to the community? It could be it's a gray area where in some cases we might say yes and others no. But the case that you just described, Ruben, John did not mention that, but he did mention the rec departments sometimes charging fees, looking to try to cover part of their costs because their budgets are limited as we know, and you know, they can, if their costs for the day are $800 for their staff and they can recoup part of that.
Yeah.
That,
Yep. That's typical practice of a rec department. I'm not talking about if the rec department says, hey, we have volunteer coaches coming, or maybe we're even paying for our coaches for a basketball team or whatever. Yeah, they would charge and they would receive that, and that's how, and we provide the space. The question I would have is it the same? Okay, yeah, I would say it's not the same as, and I think we should talk about it, is that we have people who would typically be in priority 6 or groups that are typically in priority 6 that have rules and regulations, then get contracted through the rec department, let's say, or other, I don't know, other priorities that don't have to pay. And then we end up not receiving any funds for the usage of the facilities, even though people are making money off of like our area is an area of business now for somebody.
Would it be clarified
Mhm.
in that case if under priority 3, we added the word sponsored between department and activities? So it read Town of Jaffrey and Town of Ringe Recreation Department sponsored activities. Because as you're talking about outside groups utilizing, that's not the rec department sponsoring it. This is them, oh, yeah.
I-
Facilitating it, but is this sponsored by your rec department? Are you advertising it as a rec department activity?
Mhm.
Or is this? Yeah,
Well, I think they are advertised as rec department activities,
So I mean.
but the private contractor is contracting with the recreation department.
Right. So here's where we get to,
So-
it's kind of a gray line.
So I think it's an area that we should discuss. Now, if it ends up being that we just don't charge, okay, we don't charge. But it is a situation where people who have something that, hey, I can go to the rec department and I can say, wouldn't it be cool if you offered this type of programming? I can offer that for you. And here are my prices, and here's the cost, and this is what I want, and I'm negotiating now with you department. And then, oh, and we have a space for you, and by the way, that's the school. Different budget, we're paying for the cleaning, we're paying for the upkeep, we're, all that kind of stuff. Now, if the idea is that it's benefiting our community and the community is paying for the upkeep and everything anyway, that's a whole nother perspective that should be talked about.
So one of the things.
So that's just the
So
conversation.
one possible method to delve into these things and hopefully with some efficiency is to encourage more of a I guess a discussion with the town on these issues. Because I think the points you're raising are very legitimate, but also there is that question of, is this a benefit to the community where these are modest salaries and like we pay our firemen too, they're volunteer firemen, but it's not like their salaries are not covered, they are, but they're modest. And the idea is that, oh, that's a benefit to the town to have those people, so. I
Well,
mean,
and if they used our facilities, those would be town of Jaffrey and town of Ringe related uses, and we wouldn't charge them. For rehearsal or anything of that nature, we do that with the police and so forth, we'll use the facilities for training. And things of that nature, whether they're paid or not paid, that's under, it's just, again, it's I think the loophole of a for-profit entity. Saying, I'm gonna go through a recreation program. And are they going, why wouldn't they, if they want to use our facilities for their business, why wouldn't they come directly to us? The reason to me is clear. Why they would not come to us if they could go another direction and not pay a usage fee.
well, yeah,
I just think we need to have a conversation about it.
that's right. I was gonna offer respond, but that's not what it's about. What it's about is we should have a conversation, and see if we get to the same page.
is it something that a paragraph could be added to the agreement? I mean, I'm assuming whenever the rec department has to sign off on something, that they have to have some sort of standard agreement that we do, especially with the insurance and stuff. But is this a question we can add to the agreement saying, is this something funded by the rec department or whatever, like, is this an outside? Yeah.
Like if all funds, let's put it this way. If all funds were going to the rec department for them to disperse as they are. Or is it, again, is it funding a for-profit entity? Now, it can be doing both.
Yeah.
But the primary source of funding is really going for the for-profit.
So I have a proposal, and I think, Lisa, your idea, I think, is a good idea. To make
Just
that.
to gather information, like to get,
But let's get some information first, because I think there's two benefits. One, we can sort out what's reasonable, but another thing that I think could be a benefit to us is to have an ongoing conversation between school board and town officials or town. We had the participation of the selectmen, and we weren't 100% happy with, some of the interaction. But I know for myself, I think it was valuable that they were here, that they participated. And this seems like it could be an opportunity to try to flesh out what are the concerns.
So it's a little tricky for me to comment on because my kids all came up through the after-school karate program, but
Good
Uh,
program.
it is, and that's, there's like. It is a program, but in Jack Reeve, there are maybe 40 kids, 30 to 40 kids. Who are participating in this after-school program, and then it's at Renge as well. I don't know how many kids are there, but I get that the question is. Parks and Recs is basically running an after-school program, contracting out for an after-school program. We are paying for the wear and tear, and those other two groups are taking whatever there is for profit for an after-school program that's being run in our facilities. So there's the conundrum. Right. And yet it's popular and an affordable program, after-school program for learners to participate in. So, how do you figure that one out?
It is also I guess I feel like any after-school program is supporting our kids. And so if that's something that we don't have to pay for, that they're getting privately, they're funding, they're getting the staff, they're doing the training. I have no problem with that. But looking at this, I do wonder why part 3 isn't part of part 5. Why, if we are including the scouts and the civic organizations that have to apply for a waiver if they want it to be free, why aren't the rec departments also applying? I mean, if the scouts are applying for a waiver, why isn't the rec department? But yeah, I guess I'm questioning that myself now too. What about the rec department would be different from the civic organization?
And I'm highlighting the issue because we've had a athletic facilities committee that's looking at keeping up our facilities and either asking for funds or having to raise funds or what have you. And also knowing what it costs for cleaning and being on site and all this kind of stuff. The district's paying. The district is subsidizing the some other organizations. I would say that's a way that I would look at it. And I think it's an accurate way of saying it.
So would it be a good idea for us to look at moving priority 3 into absorbing it into priority 5?
I just think, I don't know what the solution is. I just think that it's a philosophical conversation about that. I mean, it can be as simple as what John talked about that was provided to him from the town manager. That we use the fields, you can use our property and it's just. However, hey, whatever we do, it's our programming, we're contracting with this and we need to have space. And so you use our space for athletics, we'll use your space and what does it matter? Because it's a way of us getting money. So it's kind of like a fundraising effort for them. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is we have priority 6 for-profit entities. And when for-profit entities go and use something, usurp that kind of area, that's just something to think about. Whatever the answer is, and we can keep it the way it is, and then that's how it is, and that's fine. Just understanding that we don't have a good mechanism for collecting funds for repair and maintenance of the facilities that are getting hammered.
Well, I have to disagree with you, Ruben, in one sense, because we were looking, Charlie and I were looking at the capital improvement plan, and we saw millions of dollars of donations there, so.
Those are in conversations.
What happens? You probably got this covered, but what happens when people don't ask permission to use the facilities?
Oh, you mean like outside, like at a tennis court or something?
Yeah, what happens if a bunch of adults come over some weekend and use the tennis courts and there's a hole in the asphalt and somebody hurts themselves? I mean, are we covered insurance that way? What happens if a bunch of kids go over to the Range Memorial School and use the playground unsupervised and get hurt? Are we covered there?
Depends if there's negligence.
What?
So, the courts, that's why we keep up the courts.
I mean, are there
the
signs there
courts-
that say this is property of the use at your own risk? I mean, that would be inviting people to suppose use the facilities, but
I haven't, looked at the signage lately, so that's a good question.
So that is a good question, and if you think about it logically, you could come up with some reasons why we should perhaps say, don't use these facilities if you're not authorized. On the other hand, you could also come up with some great arguments against that. So,
Yeah.
I think what you do in those kind of situations, you try and talk through things and see, is there an imbalance? Like,
Yeah.
for example, if we're using Helmiston, but they're taking advantage of us, 6 times that much, that's something we should be talking about.
Yeah.
But there's also that question of, are they making money? Or are they offering a service at a reduced rate that they couldn't offer if they weren't getting access? Which is it? So, I guess, I'm sitting here thinking, the argument is that I would make is that we should be talking these things through and. We don't have to invite the selectmen back, the town manager would be a starting place, and we don't have to do it at a board meeting.
So we're gonna refer it back to policy then? Look at it?
Would that be okay? You wanna
It
take
would, but I don't know that we would be able to make any kind of decision or recommendation as a small policy group. I think this is the group that has to, because we've just brought it to them, like this is a brand new policy. I think we've had the discussion. I don't know that we would have any other. It'd be either, what do you guys want to do? It's pretty much. So, I don't see.
Well, yeah.
And part of this conversation comes up because more and more, like, for instance, the Pratt. The Pratt is being booked out like crazy. But we also, have been asked to do some programming in there or in other places like the, let's forget the Pratt, we'll go to the other basketball court. These are this is like, everyone wants those specific spots. And they're the areas that are getting the most damage. But then we have lots of school needs, and then what if they want to use in the summer? Well, that's fine, we'll use the space in summer, we want the spaces to be used, that's important. But we have not fine-tuned our summer programming yet, and what if that summer programming, is needing that, so. And then, all right, well, what's taking the place of this space? While we're trying to figure out what our best summer programming is, well, it's someone who might be running a dance program or something like that. That's a dance studio that could have come through us to use our space as opposed to going through, say, a recreation or other type of priority 1, 2, or 3 that doesn't end up paying for anything. I have no issue with the rec programs. The rec programs do great jobs in both towns.
Is
It's a
there
matter of
data?
making sure that, again, looking at, we have funding needs and revenue needs, and so, and we have a priority 6. And so the question is, what happens when for-profits come to us under the name of a nonprofit? It's just something we've never thought of.
Is there data available for who has been using the property? I know that they do use the online schedule.
Sure.
Is there data that we could look at for?
Yeah, I think that
For
we could look at
usage?
some data. I'd be happy to go and talk to John Frederick as well and talk to him or whoever is needing to be talked to over at Ring as well, for these types of things.
John Colmore.
Just to gather some,
Okay, if we could have the data, then absolutely, let's bring it back to the policy committee.
Right. Right.
Something that,
I think a policy committee can come up with some suggestions or recommended language that addresses these, and if the board wants us to wordsmith them after that,
And I think it
It'd
would
be
be
nice
great
to-
for, I think what would be fair to you, is for you to get a recommendation either from the facilities director or the superintendent. In other words, the issues have been raised, you shouldn't have to sort through the issues.
Right. Cool.
I could ask. Can't guarantee, well, I could ask the woman who owns the karate dojo. What sort of agreement she has at other schools, because she runs the after-school program in Antrim and Fitzwilliam. I don't know if she pays for the usage there. I don't know if she pays for the usage of Parks and Recs. I no idea. My impression was that she was told from JGS that she had to run the program through Parks and Recs,
And that's possible that was stated. Yeah.
because they wanted parents were coming to the school with checks. And they didn't want that. They
Mhm.
wanted it all to be handled through.
Sure.
By the way, another factor, and I think this, something we have to figure in somehow. You raised the subject, Ruben, of what our own plans are for the summer, and they may not be fully developed yet. So I think there's gotta be a contingency where we always get, our first pick. But also this summer, there's gonna be a lot of work going on in this facility, and it could be that it gets in the way of some things that normally.
Well, as we found out today, there are only 2 locations in this building that isn't gonna be touched in the summertime. That's why, I mean, it's
Hmm.
really important that we kind of know what we're gonna use, so we can use the old middle school area, the oldest part of the building, and we can use scrap.
But not the high school.
Everything else will be under construction. Yep. So those are the factors, and so,
Can we move on to the next section of the agenda?
I think we're ready to move on. Is that right? Thank you for the discussion. Policy review. JL, well, Lisa, do you want to take us through?
Sure. Second reading for concussions and head injuries, and I understand that there are no further changes from the medical staff. Is that what I overheard? That there were no changes for them, correct?
Yeah, I guess just a little bit of background real quick. We sent out all 3 of these policies to associated staff that would have any sort of feedback. There was no feedback for changes on concussions and head injuries, which is JLCJ. There was no feedback on JLF, reporting child abuse or neglect. There was one comment on JLD, which deals with school counseling. It was specifically,
To change guidance counselor there to school counselor.
yeah, to make sure that that language is universal
Mhm.
for school council.
right there,
Just because
that
they
last-
pointed out the differences in definitions between those 2 terms.
And in so in the first one, no changes to the concussion and head injury that's provided from the New Hampshire School Board Association. Anything that you see highlighted will be removed. That's just their legal things. The next policy, reporting child abuse and neglect. There is one change to this that will ask to be removed. And that is under, on page 3, signage and notification. Nick, before this goes through, if we pass it, please remove that paragraph. Unless you want me to write it up in, okay.
I have to reformat it all anyway.
Perfect.
So see,
Yep.
just drop it.
Yeah, so it's just signage that we felt was redundant. Other than that, everything go through. And then, again, no changes on the school guidance except for the bullet point 5. The summary report, again, that was redundant. That's specific to the school counseling program. We can discuss other ways of getting different reports, but this particular one didn't feel like that was appropriate in this policy.
And even though this is, I mean, it is actually a substantive change. changing the word guidance to school for that last
Yeah, is
sentence.
that in there too?
It's right
Yeah, I
there.
see it, yeah.
Yeah, it's that
So-
the guidance counselor is responsible for developing a program, so.
Yep.
All other places it says school council.
Yeah,
So it's
and I
just a
think
matter
that-
of consistency.
Yeah, and I think that's a great piece of input to change that wording. I think we've done a lot of wording, clarity,
Mhm.
as in getting rid of Sears, but
It's important.
it's update,
it matters,
keeping
yeah.
us updated and relevant. So, doing that, so you got that, Nick? Perfect. Any other questions on them?
All right, so do we want to approve these individually? Or as a group? The last one, we're making some small modifications, so
So I'll make a motion that we approve JLCJ, JLF, and JLD as amended.
I'll second.
okay. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, James.
It's Christine.
Oh, thank you, Christine.
Charlie.
Thank you. All those.
I
in
would have
favor,
if she didn't speak up
Please
so
signify
fast.
by saying aye.
I,
Okay.
No, she wanted to. By name.
Thank you, Lisa. for working on that. And board committee updates. Charlie, you've given us
Finance covered, finance covered the purchasing guidelines and CTE, and then we also did some looks at progress year to date and what the end of the year looks like.
Good. And you said, do you have anything more to add on policy? What's your,
No, policy is gonna be meeting this coming Thursday at 4:30.
thank you. And
isn't Cole's meeting this Thursday?
No, couple months.
Okay, I have something on my calendar then. Okay.
Daisy, did you say these goals coming up?
Nope. I didn't pay attention to the right date apparently. But education committee met. And we talked about the CT reno process. We need to figure out what our timeline will look like and come to the board with proposals. We get this opportunity once every 25 years. The state would supply 75% of the funds. We as a local community have to come up with the other 25%, whether it's fundraising, donors, etc. But we are responsible for 25% of it. The architectural planning, we're hoping, if we're moving forward with a reno, to have determined by fall of 2023. The application to the state by January of 2024. And then put in a bond vote, if that's how we're going about it, by March of 2024. We have the options of renovating our current space, of tearing down and replacing our current space, or repurposing our current space. We were looking at adding cosmetology, culinary arts, and or the forensics and public safety pieces. The closest cosmetology is Keene or Milford. I didn't write down culinary arts. I don't remember where the closest culinary arts one is. I think it's in Keene. And then the forensics law track would tie into Conval's forensics and public safety, It can also repurpose some of our science classes. And if we went with the forensics route, it could also allow renovations of current science spaces as well as the CTE space.
Casey, can I ask a question? Was early childhood discussed at all as an option?
It was not, but I will.
I really would like that.
So
discussed.
Conval does careers and education, which does include early childhood.
So they have a CTE program for early childhood that leads to,
They have a CTE program for careers and education and sort of broad-based.
Broader, not so specific.
like it focused.
I made note for my next meeting. I will come back with information on that. We also talked about how for the cosmetology, once they're in their second year of the courses, they generally will do clinical hours of sort. And so then they would open up the space for an hour or two, whatever their structure is, that community members can come in, get their hair cut, and the community members would pay for the haircut, but it instantly turns around and gets used right back into the program itself to pay for supplies and different things that they're using for the cosmetology. The culinary arts would create a small scale eating establishment. Kind of the same scenario, that it would be open select times, and potentially that one can then turn into a catering business that the students can help cater different things in the area. They can do school lunch or like staff lunches. And I thought of something earlier, that the WOW committee is teaming up with the community dinners thing. And then if we had the CTE culinary arts, they could come back and tie into it all together. Potentially.
Do we offer business courses?
Yes.
We do?
So,
Have you thought of connecting the business course to these?
Yes, that is part of the intermingling of getting them all together, is they will do the culinary arts or the cosmetology and the business classes cohesively. That's the word I'm looking for. But there are business classes.
and there's a business CTE program as well. A separate focused one, as well as our own. in-house stuff.
But I believe that these will be more specialized. In other words, you'll learn more about managing a restaurant or managing a salon.
Mhm.
So there are specific unique things about the restaurant business that are not in general business, are more specific. And inventories and all those kind of things. So I believe these persons can delve a lot more on that. And bring it down into deeper dig than what you get in business.
Hey, Daisy, thank you for the update. That was great.
I'm very excited about that project.
Sounds like a lot of work to be done on CTE, and there's in the midst of a lot of other things on the education committee's plate.
Yep. Yep, this entire meeting was based right around the CTE program and everything that comes with the reno process.
Now, Ruben, do you have any thoughts to add in terms of what should be done to, further the preparations?
Well, I think, what I stated earlier about putting an RFP out. Is gonna be important, so I think we'll bring that RFP back, a sample RFP back. To the board shortly. That will be worked on this week or next week, or both. And, of course, part of that is going to be, what's the, right? So, we can write it in such a way that can give us, we can have some flexibility. But if we have more of an understanding of what we'd like to move forward with, my guess is that there are board members who have interest in what, we might like to go with and pursue, but I think we still have more conversations to go. I think most of us, when we talked about this, I think a year or maybe even 2 ago, we were thinking solely the construction trades. And we were feeling, yeah, that makes sense. Adding the extra possibilities, that's where the conversations really need to focus.
David did a lot of work in terms of the data
Yeah.
about percentage of our population that do these jobs and the growth, the job growth in those areas. So I think that the selection of the cosmetology and culinary arts was based on the data information we have from Cheshire County.
I mean, I can definitely say we have learners here who would be excited about both of those options. Certainly, we know that the culinary one seems to, we have evidence of that already this year of people, wanting to at least dabble in that area. And even if you don't kind of go through the entire strand and you do pieces of it, that's still valuable for life.
Absolutely.
Well, and like for culinary arts, even your basic food prep, how to not cross-contaminate things, like those are very valuable life skills. As somebody who has a severe food allergy, I am very cautious of people's houses that I eat at, not to say that anybody's trying to hurt me in any way, but I go into anaphylactic shock, so I need to make sure that things are prepared correctly. And students learning the basics of keeping a kitchen clean are life skills that they'll use forever.
It crosses into so many other areas, of health and wellness.
Yep.
Yeah,
And-
nutrition.
Enterprise budget creation, managing
Yep.
towards your goals, all of that is pretty huge.
Customer service, communication.
Mhm.
I just want coffee.
Don't
If we
talk
can
to
get-
me.
Out of this, that's.
So moving on.
Wow, we moved fast.
Well, this is-
Wellness, so a subgroup of the wellness committee has been meeting with this idea of creating a school garden on this campus. There are 2 teachers who are very interested in this. Mr. Baker, speaking of culinary arts, and Miss Her. We've identified a potential spot, which would be directly behind the 2 small greenhouses. For many reasons. One is that it would be, it's close to a working outdoor spigot.
Yeah.
It's very important. The greenhouses are there, whether or not they're used for production or for storage. It's an area that can be easily beautified. It's accessible, it's easy for the students to reach. If the cafeteria, food services was ever to want to pull from the gardens, there's actually a door right there, which is pretty handy. So the Cornucopia project is offering to write us into one of their grants, which would primarily, I think, entirely fund the creation of the gardens. The $3,000 grant. I think anything above and beyond that we needed, we could probably get donations for locally. So we're moving ahead with that.
It gets good sun over there.
It gets good sun. We did use the sun tracker. And like I said, it's an area that's been, an area that's been trashed. So I see that as a perfect garden spot, but really it could be beautified. And it's an area where students will walk past on their way down to the lower fields. So you're talking about adding some in really could be a really cool outdoor learning space. And it's something that I think students would have pride in, which is important. So there's that. The Wellness Committee is going to meet beginning of March to talk about
Thursday, March 9th.
March 3rd.
I've got March 9th.
Okay, yeah, to talk about a spring walk to school day. And also to gather some members to be on the selection committee for our next food service. Bids will be coming in. 5 companies have done a walkthrough. So Carrie thought that all 5 would submit a bid. And a selection committee needs to be formed, and the wellness committee will offer some members to be part of that committee. Exciting.
Will the 2 teachers that you mentioned?
Yeah.
For high school or something, is the middle school, like, how could the middle school be integrated into the garden projects?
Mr. Baker's clubs certainly have middle school students in it, so he would be pulling in middle school students. And then Ms. Herr had mentioned that once the gardens were going, she would like to get the Envirothon going again, which I don't know if that's a high school or a middle school. That's high school.
It was high school.
Okay.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
that
there's
would be
actually a
very
fair
cool.
amount of conversation about that.
Happens in my
Just
household
having
too.
that cultural diversity there, that's all, just, again, opportunities for the middle school to be part of what the high school is taking advantage of.
I'm working on someone to donate some berry bushes as part of the project. So this idea that kids walking down the trail could nibble on some blueberry bushes, I find very appealing. So we'll see. I'm working on it.
I think it would be cool. This is much bigger and not part of this discussion, but since you're talking about kind of a vision of blueberries and so forth, I would love to just get rid of all of that, those bushes and whatever
all that
trees and so on
invasive.
that go all the way down. That's, that way, and then stagger it like, flatbeds kind of in a staggered way all the way down.
Terraces,
Terraces, yes, terrace is good.
yes.
Good, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
the word for that. So the terrace would be amazing.
Yep.
Like that would be so cool to see that, obviously building a structure so that you didn't have a mudslide.
That conversation has. The vision lives in my head too.
Okay,
Is there any detritus left from construction that can be utilized in that? Isn't there some PVC or cement, something that?
You wouldn't
being
even need much.
left
You wouldn't
from
want to use
everything that-
PVC. PVC. maybe.
we got some broken clay
There's a-
pipes, yeah.
See, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
tons of
clay,
broken clay pipes, yeah.
That's a good segue.
We're trying to give you transitions, yeah.
The facilities committee.
Yeah.
We did discuss a number of things. Some of them we've touched on here, such as the repairs to the Pratt. Another indication of, a communication goal really remind our people that we have very old buildings. There was decisions that we made to stay with these buildings, but that they have costs, so. And that ties into our need for our capital improvement plan. And I think once we get past this budget season, we need to think about how we integrate that into our planning for next year and educate people. We spent most of our, or a good chunk of our meeting today talking about the HVAC project. We had 5 staff people from the EEI company. 5 or 6. We had a good group there. They answered a bunch of questions. Mike spoke quite a bit, gave a presentation on the problems that they're facing. There is one significant issue with range where there's a lot of noise coming from a new unit that was installed. That's actually not a new unit. It's a unit that's been there, but when cooling dehumidification was added, that created a noise problem, and they said that they're committed to fixing it. But what the fix is going to be is uncertain at this time. They're going to try 3 or 4 different things potentially before they get there. But we did talk about other things coming forward in the project. As Ruben mentioned, there's going to be work being done in this building all throughout the building, especially the 2nd floor, but the entire building this summer is going to be busy, with the exception of the Pratt. And then the main 3-story portion of the middle school. It's something to be aware of. I think they said they hope by the end of the 2024 to have everything finished.
Yep.
The hope before that, but that's the outside date. The first part of the project, which was the project portion that was funded with ESSER. They say they're substantially complete, sufficient to meet government audit requirements. Although they still have a checklist that they'll be working on as they finish both projects. That's a unified checklist. And Christine, is there anything else that I'm not?
Just new doors are coming in over April vacation, vestibule doors for the grade schools. That will be
To start.
handicap accessible.
And as Ruben also referred to earlier, the process for hiring a new facilities director will be ongoing. John will not be a member of the interview team, but he will be a member of the hiring process. In other words, he will take the candidates around, show them the facilities, make sure they're aware of what it is that we're trying to do. He'll try to provide input and feedback, what he knows about the needs and how the candidates meet them. And the hope is that we can actually get someone on board while John is still here, so that there could be some overlap, which is something that seems to rarely happen, although it's often seen as a good if it can happen. All right. So are there any other board matters or any other items that
I just have one board matter that I'd like to circle back to a conversation we had last time about communication and just how we are sharing the different aspects. And this is great, but just talking about the boards, the work committee updates at the end, but we're tired. And I was wondering if we want to look at a model where we change our meetings so that one idea I had was that the first of the 2 meetings in the beginning of the month is a superintendent's report. And then the second meeting is not a superintendent's report, cutting you out completely with conscious, but not having you prepare a PowerPoint, not having the second meeting of the month be a select particular group of meetings that have happened in that month. And then, so like those meetings, something like this where maybe it's all, but maybe it's not all. Maybe it's just, let's really focus on education and finance. And then the next meeting, let's focus on wellness and communications. And then policy, those kind of things. Keep our business, keep doing the business. And if there's important things that we need to know, have them mentioned, of course, but not have a formal superintendent's report every meeting. Make it more formal about committee meetings. So we really have, like Daisy, you have this book. So the people presenting for those committees have something formal to present. Maybe a PowerPoint, maybe just verbal, but I'm wondering if that might help us know that we're hitting everybody. And yeah, of course, Ruben, you'll always you're at all the meetings, you always have input, but that might free us up some time for that communication piece. That's my suggestion.
I agree.
We definitely have some big projects coming up with CTE and hiring of new pretty key personnel. So I'm not opposed. I don't know about. I understand what you're saying about the superintendent's report. I mean, you don't want to just make the meetings longer.
I think what you're saying is that through the process of these reports being, the work of the school is being done. And so everyone's getting reporting out, we're being more involved. It actually fits our model of team as opposed to centralized area. And I can be part of that conversation as well, as I'm usually aware of most of what's going on. I don't, I did miss this last committee meeting, but so I think it's always good to relook at our formats and see what we can do.
So
That would, better for everyone.
we don't necessarily need to remove the superintendent's report, but remove the action items, the policy discussions, the policy reviews, remove those pieces that take up a majority of our meeting time. And have the first meeting, just like it was tonight with all the extra pieces. The second meeting, you can do the superintendent's report, do the consent agendas, and then committee updates and actually have time to discuss them and ask questions and answer questions and actually be more of a board part of it and not just a word vomit about this one and then you word vomit and it just here's what there is and that's it. That we actually would have the time to discuss them because we're not taking up a majority of the time with the action items or discussions or reviews.
Well, we still have to do the consent agenda.
Well, yes, but the
Yeah.
And I think we still have to do the action item.
Yeah.
I think we still have to do those.
The action items, okay, are something that have to be done because it's time critical.
okay.
Okay, now, I'm only speaking from my experience. Most of the issues that come before the board are real-time issues. Even the superintendent's report, there are times when he needs board approval to move forward with something. So my experience has been that we've tried different ways of doing it before, and we always end up coming back to the same way of doing it because of the time critical nature of the stuff that we talk about. And once a month, we're gonna have a longer meeting because we have all of these committees that are meeting in the first 3 weeks of the month. So they're gonna be longer. I mean, yeah, we had, education was delayed by a week, so we had them. We have the finance committee, that's once a month. We have the policy, and a policy gets reviewed every time because the policy committee meets once a month and we put forth the policies. So even though we've tried things in the past, they haven't been successful because of the time critical nature of most of the issues that we have to deal with. So that's just my 2 cents. If they want to try something different, go ahead and try it.
Another thing that might be able to help is we could start these meetings at 6 instead of 7. And put non-public in a different location.
I'm hesitant to do that because I like knowing there's a time frame enough. And I like knowing that we can come back. There's been non-publics where we've needed to step away and come back. And so I guess I like being able to know, we're doing this for so long. And then taking a breath. Coming back, I guess I would hesitate there, but I like the idea. I hear you, Charlie, with here we go, trying something new over and over again. But I think if we had specific knowledge saying on this night, it's gonna be, a prepared presentation from these committees,
So my only question is,
right?
once you make that statement, are you gonna not do things that come up to be done?
No, because all the business would still be in. Why, we're not saying all the business is gone.
I agree with you. I mean, it's non-public should be 60, but I mean, for us to run, 2.5 hours. It's not concerned about budget. All right, is a long period of time. It is a long period of time. The problem is, first meeting of the year is 3 hours. The second meeting of the, first meeting of the month is 3 hours. The second meeting of the month is 2.5 hours. So we're not gaining anything by spreading things out. We're not becoming more efficient.
So I want to chime in here too. I think that improving our processes is always possible and usually a good idea. I think that there's, in my own sense in looking at this, sometimes there's a little bit of being overwhelmed by the things that are on our plates. Just the things that we touched on tonight. And the CTE is a good example. We've known about it for a while, but who has the time? I don't see anybody here, and I'm thinking about the staff in particular, but we're all, as board members, just as involved. Everybody's working pretty hard. And I know the superintendent is putting in enormous amounts of hours. Between partnerships. Hasn't even mentioned tonight the new Leadership Institute. I know that was something you touched on a couple of months ago, or a couple of meetings ago, maybe. The facilities, the athletic facilities committee, another whole ball of wax. The intergenerational committee. There's a lot going on. But getting back to us as a board, how can we improve our processes? And I think that, yeah, there is always. You want to be careful about reinventing the wheel all the time, but you can always improve it, and you can always look at a structure and say, how do we make this work better than it's been working these last 3 months or this last 12 months or whatever it is. And I think we should do that. Now, what that looks like, I don't know, there's some good ideas here, but we've got to ask ourselves, what works and within the constraints that we just discussed. Charlie brings up time issues and, there's all sorts of things that we all know about. And, in these situations, a lot of times a board retreat is something that people look to as, a way to have a discussion that's a little more thoughtful. But it's hard to find time for those kind of things, right? Board retreats. That's not to say, though, that we couldn't set aside an hour at the beginning of a meeting, or maybe instead of a non-public, and we'll try and hash things out. I don't know, maybe this kind of a format at this time. It's funny, 9:30 is pretty late. On the other hand, we started at 7, which was nice. And I remember some meetings that we went to close to 11. Fortunately, we haven't had any of them.
That was the beginning of this past year, because it was the start to me being here, and we were here till close to 11 multiple times.
All right, I will make a motion to adjourn.
public
Before we
comments.
do, Nick had his hand up. I'd just like to give him a
Right.
chance to chime in.
Yeah, just a quick comment on my end, as someone who, obviously deals with communication, school board stuff, et cetera. I think that it's great to look at the concept of how we can make the board meetings more efficient, divvy things up, deal with expectations, presentations, things like that. But one of the things that I keep hearing about the board committee part specifically is we have these board committees doing an incredible amount of work. We come to the board and we just kind of discuss the work that's already been done at a board level. I'm still wondering if there's a way that we can almost disconnect that process from the school board meeting itself, so that we can work on deliverable chunks of information that not only get distributed to the school board, but also to the public. I think most people don't understand or know what the committees are, what they do when they meet. They're largely during times that people can't be here. I think we need to do more to take the information, take these conversations and create deliverable pieces of information that can be shared, because when we're doing that, we're not taking a hour to 2 to 3 hour meeting that's in a subcommittee, then bringing it here, trying to discuss how we can talk about 7 different committees every single meeting, 1 meeting a month. I think it's great to sometimes have those bigger level conversations. If we have a facilities committee has a huge project, we have an action item that is a very actionable item for the board to discuss. There could be a presentation, something like that. That's the level where we can update it. The education committee is talking about bringing some of the CTE stuff to the further board level, retooling presentations so that the full board can hear. But I wonder if there's that kind of leveled approach where we could work on a way that committees could report out information so that we could share it with a broader audience, and then we could actually start letting people know about these meetings. Because, we had this breakdown where the facilities committee is talking about CIP type projects and things like that. And people are like, oh, I don't know any of that. You guys aren't doing any of that. And they don't know because we're meeting Monday at 10 o'clock. And there's not really a big deliverable thing to say, yes, we are doing this. So I think that that's, for me, the thing that I keep missing in all this is this idea that we're talking about trying to discuss something in one meeting and another meeting when we're already battling attendance issues and other things like that. We have 1 person in audience here. I think we've maxed out at 6 tonight, and it's largely been staff and the same people that show up to every other meeting. We're getting about 30 to 50 views on every YouTube video. So it's that's not a large audience. How do we get this information out more? So that's my thought or thing to chew on.
And just one more thing before the motion to adjourn. We do have a second public comment section, which we need to honor.
Yes.
One other thing I'd like to add
Yes.
is that each one of these committees, any board member can attend anytime they want to. I'm not a member of the facilities committee, but I try to be there as often as I can because I'm very interested in the work that they're doing. All right, and I would say to every board member, if you're interested in wellness, or you're interested in finance, or you're interested in any of that stuff, feel free to join in. There's nothing that prevents you. I mean, if you have an interest in things and you want to know more about it, join right in. Don't just sit back and wait for a committee report to keep you informed.
Yes, and I'd like to add to that I think what Nick just said is a good point. We have to have a way to get that work that we're doing out so that the public both knows what's going on, knows that their school board is confronting these things, and maybe they have an opportunity to be involved in some way.
All right, so I am back for public comments. We've had a minor technical issue in building where our projector normally Bluetooth connects to my computer. Online audience currently is just seeing a feed of the room, no policy, so I'm not gonna be able to put the policy up on the board for folks to see.
okay.
But I think the people that are here have seen it enough times to know. So if you want to make a public comment, physically raise your hand or raise your hand via your whatever screen you're on. We can address you, first name, last name, and town of residence. All right, and I don't seem to be seeing anything from anybody in the audience.
Okay. So, we do want to have a brief non-public, and, we'll keep this short. At least my part of it, I'll keep short. That's this. So,
You do.
good night, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Go, have someone will make a motion, go into non-public for a purpose. And then, we take a roll call.
Okay.
I don't think we've adjourned this meeting though.
No, I think
We'd come back and adjourn.
Oh, okay.
The
Sorry.
public meeting afterwards.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn the non-public for purposes of
personnel.
personnel.
Oh, I'll second.
Second. Okay, thank you,
Totally
Lisa
spacing.
and Christine. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. A roll call, okay. Christine,
Aye.
Daisy,
Aye.
Charlie,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Forbes,
Yes.
and I.